Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for October 17th, 2022. Well, we're at a point where either the world gets new leadership and a new economic paradigm, or the whiners and failures who are running things today will obliterate humanity in a nuclear war if they can't do it through a global depression. Over the weekend, the Schiller Institute had an international youth conference, which was quite extraordinary in that it included some old-timers who are quite competent in what they do, but also some younger people who are emerging as a new generation of leadership, unencumbered by the geopolitical lunacy that dominates policy in the Western world. This was coming off the viral exposure of LaRouche youth activists intervening on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and exposing her as a complete fraud, that she's a supporter of the genocidal war going on in Ukraine. She's a supporter of the Biden policy of arming the Ukrainian neo-Nazi units. And she had nothing to say except they were being rude by calling attention to her hypocrisy. Millions of people saw it. The video is viral. And many of you I know have seen it, have shared it, and it gives you an indication of the potential that exists in this new youth movement that we're putting together. And this is the leadership for a new paradigm, based on dumping geopolitics, the idea that the world should be divided into hostile camps, that what the policies of the global bankers, whether it's the Great Reset or the Malthusian Green New Deal, has to dominate, and any country that gets out of line will be hit hard with global NATO. Well, the financial collapse is making the Great Reset an afterthought. The reset now is a reset from the reset, as I'll get to in a moment. The Green New Deal is exposed by the fact that it can't keep Europe warm because it's cutting off the existing level of adequate and efficient energy sources and replacing it with inefficient and inadequate and very costly so-called sustainable sources. Now, what's the response of the City of London and Wall Street? More of the same. We hear whining about failed leadership, but where did this leadership come from? It came out of their think tanks, out of their universities, out of their government offices, their institutions. Let's take a look at one of these so-called leaders, Liz Truss, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, who's one of the most unpopular figures in just a little over a month that she's been Prime Minister. Last week, she had to fire her Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwarteng. Now, Kwarteng is not just an ordinary character. He's been close with Liz Truss since they wrote a book together more than a decade ago. They've been plotting their program for years, but their mini budget turned into a maxi bust. The British bond offerings were collapsing. The Bank of England was fighting with her. The Bank of England stepped in and basically won the fight, forcing her to drop her plans for massive tax cuts, to fire her close buddy, Kwasi Kwarteng, and now to come up with a new plan. Well, what's her new plan? She has no new plan. Their plan is to protect and defend a bankrupt speculative system. And so far, they've been able to do it by using the forces of NATO to crush any third world country that would resist it, whether it's Iraq, Libya, wherever. But Russia's resisting it, China's resisting it, India's resisting it. They're all resisting this new world order. And as a result, there's not enough forces of NATO to go around to accomplish their objective. So what we've seen is that the free market model was exposed by the collapse of the situation in Great Britain. And now we see the strategic policy entering a similar phase of collapse. What are you going to do about Ukraine? You know, they've already tried sanctions against Russia, stealing money from Russia, blowing up pipelines, blowing up a bridge. Is that going to win a war for Ukraine? And a war for what purpose? The sovereignty and freedom of the Ukrainian people? as if NATO actually cares about that. If they cared about it, why would they send the International Monetary Fund into Ukraine to squeeze every last penny out? Why would they order their puppet Zelensky to privatize land, to sell off the best farmland in the world to the global food cartels at a moment of global food shortages? Why? Because that's the way they do things. They're committed to a Malthusian reduction of world population and having a prosperous Ukraine, which would be neutral, doesn't fit into their plans. Their plans include Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia, and they're not going to change that. Now, let me give you a perfect example of that from one of the masterminds of this process, and I use that term loosely. Frederick Kemp of the Atlantic Council, who just wrote a new piece. He writes a piece every week. This is called Global Leadership Wanted, Global Leadership to Meet This Historic Moment. Well, he's right about that. But what he then goes on to talk about is what should the policy be? He's saying that there's been a failure of will so far. Not enough is being done to beat Russia and China. More must be done. And so he cites the U.S. National Security Strategy document that just came out to say that this is going in the right direction. He said the NSS puts it this way, quote, "Our goal is clear. We want a free, open, prosperous, and secure international order," unquote. Kemp then writes, to achieve that, according to the NSS, requires 3 lines of effort. And these are the 3 lines. 1, invest in the underlying sources and tools of American power and influence. Well, that's weapons. That's NATO. That's hybrid warfare. 2, build the strongest possible coalition of nations to enhance our collective influence. That unity is collapsing. We see it in Europe collapsing. We see it with the global south, where countries are moving behind Russia and China. And 3, modernize and strengthen our military so it is equipped for the era of strategic competition with major powers. So he's talking about more war. That's leadership for the West. Now, then he comes with his critique of the national strategy document. He says, what it fails to say is that all bets are off if the civilized world, I put civilized in quotes, doesn't first defeat the bear at the door. Ukraine must succeed in pushing back Putin, and Putin must fail in his delusional and imperial ambitions. At least according to Kemp, they're imperial ambitions. Then he says, all else that is imagined in the document could fail if the civilized world doesn't provide sufficient arms, sanctions, and political will to succeed at this. He's talking about war and having the foolishness to escalate the war. There's one place to start. Now listen to this. Western nations can change their laws so that the $300 billion in Russian assets currently frozen in the international financial system could be repurposed to help Ukraine rebuild. Where's the rules-based order? You change the rules to steal the money. They're stealing $300 billion from Russia. What does that say to every other country that has money invested in Western banks? It says, kiss it goodbye unless you completely bow down to the sovereignty of the rules-based order or the unipolar order. That's what Kemp is offering. And he says that what's been achieved thus far is impressive, that is the war against Russia, but it remains insufficient when measured against the historic stakes. If the civilized world falls short, this could be its final act. Now, finally, he has this on the leadership challenge. The question is, which leaders will define the years ahead? Well, that's the question we started with today. Will it be the tired leadership of the neoconservatives, of the neoliberals, of the warhawks? Or will it be the inspired, vigorous youth challenge coming from the LaRouche youth movement? Now, he goes on and says, will those leaders be Putin G and their ilk, who lack both democratic constraints and legitimacy? As if there are democratic constraints on the censorship regime and the murder regime that's carrying out this war in Ukraine. Or the likes of U.S. President Joe Biden and Truss, who are so hamstrung by messy politics. Or could the example of Ukraine's Zelensky inspire similar courage in others? Zelensky, the puppet, that's who he's holding forth as the leader in the future? Well, if you're reduced to promoting a deranged puppet dancing on their strings as the solution to the problem, you're going to fail. I'll put my money on the LaRouche Youth Movement, and I think you should support us also. Take a look at the conference, the video from the conference from this weekend, which will be linked at the bottom of the description section, to get a sense of what kind of future we can have if we break with this tired, whiny leadership of the likes of Frederick Kemp, Liz Truss, Macron, Biden, the Republican Party in the United States. We need new leadership, and that leadership is emerging, and we need your support. Thanks, and I'll see you tomorrow.